Hey there YouTube, Far North Racing here. Today we're going to do an unboxing video and a test and review of the King Canada KC-116 bench mounted drill press. This thing right here. So we've opened up the box and sitting on the top is the base, and over here we have the work table. We've scraped the top layer off, and underneath we find in this tray the motor in head unit, the column and table support, and a bag of random parts. Okay, so let's get started assembling this thing. Now this is interesting. The wall diameter of the support column is only a 1/16 of an inch thick. It's true that stiffness is determined primarily by the outer diameter, but that is surprisingly thin for a drill press column. At least I think so. So here we can see the mechanism we use for raising and lowering the table. You can see that there's this rack that goes up and down the support column, and it's supported in place by this collar on top, supported by that set screw. We'll just zoom in. There you go. There's the set screw. And it fits into that column, and then it fits down here on the base. There's a ridge line. We'll just focus. There we go. So the rack fits into that cup there, which means that when you loosen off the pinch bolt here, which pinches the table support to the column, you can now rotate that mechanism around the support column, and that'll just slide around that cup and in the recess on the top of the set screw. So that means you can go ahead and rotate the table around the column if you want. I'm not entirely sure why I'd want to do that, but it's good to know that I can if I decide I have the need. So I've mounted the head on top of the support column. It just slides over and is secured with a couple of bolts. And you can see that when it sits on my bench, it is just way too tall to be effective. I have to reach up over my head to grab a hold of the feed levers to be able to feed it in. That was designed for a bench that's a lot lower than one that I have, so we're going to have to figure out a way to make this smaller. And if you look in, you'll see that on top of, focus, the support for the table height adjusting rack and the base of the head, we've got a great big amount of space in there. So that gives us an opportunity to be able to shorten this thing and make its height a little more usable for our bench. Alright, there she is, all set up on the bench, all bolted down so it's ready to use. That chuck is now at about face height, so I've got myself a face shield there to keep hot bits from smacking me in the eyes. And there you go. So here you can see how they've gone and done the speed selection mechanism. You've got 3 pulleys, one here on the spindle, an intermediate pulley here in the middle, and then back here is the motor drive pulley. By selecting this belt and this belt in here, changing which set of pulleys they're on, you get one of 16 speeds that goes from as low as 220 RPM up to a maximum of 3,600, which is a decent range of speeds. There's a couple different ways you can do a V-belt series like this. You can do a 2-pulley system where you've got a big pyramid on here and a big pyramid on here and then just move belts back and forth. That one is easier to change belts on because you only have to move one belt. But you can only get that pulley so high and still have enough belt tension to be able to fit it in there. By doing 3 pulleys like this, they give you a wider range of speeds, with the only real trade-off being is that occasionally you have to play leapfrog with these belts to pick which speed you want. You pull both belts off, set the first one, set the second one, and then you're good. So one of the reasons why I bought this specific model is because of how they've decided to attach the chuck here to the spindle up inside here. Most drill presses have what's called a Jacobs taper on the spindle in here. That's because the chuck standard, which was made by the company called Jacobs that invented this key chuck, it has a female hole in here with a taper on it, and the dimensions are specified by the Jacobs company as to what that is. So that Jacobs taper into the chuck is universal because it's the only way you get a chuck on there. How this part fits into the drill press in the motor is different though. A cheaper one, this is hard wired directly into the thing. It's a mechanical piece so that if this taper ever gets gibbled, you have to replace the whole spindle. A better way to do it is to have another taper in here. So this adapter piece here is a male taper and a male taper. And this particular model uses an industry standard called a Morse taper 2. That means that you can, first off, you stick a drift in here. This little thing there. It just slides in that hole, and you give it a whack with a hammer and the whole thing falls out. Because it's a standard machinist taper, you can get things other than chuck adapters to fit into there. You can get twist drills that have an MT2 taper on the top, so you just clicks inside there, and now you get a firm grip on it without needing a chuck. You can also get adapters for things like this annular cutter, which is a great way to cut into aluminum and sheet steel. You don't have to drill all the way through because the center here is open. It's like God's own hole saw. You can get adapters where this, instead of being a straight shank like this one here is, you can get it so it's a Morse taper 2. It just clicks up inside, and now you can go ahead and fit these annular cutters on here however you like. Just a nice way of extending the usefulness of the piece by using standard parts. All right, we'll just do a little run-out test here. And that's looking pretty good, all things considered. Less than half a thou. That's not bad. Okay, we can look at a few other features here. You can see it's a 5/8 JT3 taper chuck, which is nice and big and gives you a good fair amount of range on that thing. Here we've got a halogen light. Nice little touch, throw some more light on what you're working on. It's always good to be able to see what you're drilling. This feature here is a marking laser. It draws an X that shows where the bit's going to hit. I'm not a huge fan of that feature. I find it's really useful on a saw to be able to show where the blade's going to hit on the marking when you're setting it up. That's pretty useful. But with this, when you bring down the spindle, you're going to see where the tip is going to hit. So I don't see me using that feature very much. Up here, it's got a depth of cut scale, and it's got the ability to lock out a depth. So if you need to drill a blind hole to a certain depth, you can do it there. So that's nice. Overall, not a bad piece of kit. When you buy one of these Chinese drills, there's a factory in China, or maybe it's a couple of them, I'm not really sure, but they all work off of a more or less standardized set of castings. So you'll see a couple of different brands that use the same sort of head and table as this one here. Wen uses them, and Jet uses them, and Harbor Freight uses them, and there's a couple different companies that all use more or less the same set of castings. These companies like King, who import these things, their trick is they're trying to hit a price point, right? They're trying to make these things come in at a certain cost for people to buy them. And it's up to the buyer in Canada to figure out where he wants to spend his money, because the factory in China will configure it however you want. So it's a question of, where do I cut corners to keep the price point down, and where do I find things on here that I need to keep solid if the thing is supposed to do what it's supposed to do. So it looks like what King has done is they've cost reduced a little bit on this mechanism. They haven't put in the fancy electronic speed control that some of them have. The belts work just fine. This column is perhaps a little bit thinner than it needs to be, and the mechanism here on the side from getting the table up and down is a little bit hokey. But they've put a good solid spindle on there with almost no run out. They've got a reasonable chuck. The motor is decent. The halogen light is a useful feature. And the castings are good and solid. So for your $300 that you spend on this thing, you get a machine with enough power to be able to drill what you need to do. It makes round holes, and it's not going to go and break the bank like a Delta would. All right, so the last step is to see just how well this thing cuts. And we've got ourselves a 1/2 inch split point high-speed steel drill on there and a 1/4 inch piece of steel. We've got the RPM set to 430, which is where the drill wants to be for this. And we'll just go ahead and give this a try and see what happens. So we can see that powered through there with no trouble at all. That's not my sharpest drill bit, so the surface finish isn't great, but that's not the drill's problem. That's or the drill press's problem. That's the bit's problem. So there she goes, right through steel, 1/2 inch, no problem at all. That'll do the job. Thanks for watching.